Hello everyone, good morning. I'm Mohammed Arefin from Colorado State, session chair for this Perception 3 session. Today we have 4 presentations, 2 on-site and 2 online. So we can start with our first presentation today. The first presentation's title of the paper is Measuring and Predicting Multisensory Reaction Latency, a Probabilistic Model for Visual-Auditory Integration. The authors are Peng, Yunxiang, Zhang, Daniel Jimenez Navarro, Anna Serrano, Karol, Myszkowski, San, and the presenter is Peng.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending my talk. Our work aims to predict human reaction time under different visual and auditory conditions, providing metric guidance for VR and AR applications. In recent years, VR, AR, and Ammaar have developed rapidly. We now have advanced VR headsets that offer an immersive experience in virtual worlds. We also have the AR device that can enhance our perception of reality in ways we have never experienced before. Mixed reality allows users to interact with both digital and physical environments, offering new possibilities for applications like education and design. The Orion stands out for its extremely lightweight design, providing users with a highly comfortable experience during the extended use. Thanks to these advanced devices, we can now do many exciting interactive applications in virtual worlds, such as the driving simulations, and also the gaming experience. In these applications, our reaction is a crucial point. The reaction time is defined as the time it takes for a human to perceive and process the targets, and it is measured as the time interval of targets and saccade onsets. Knowing users' reaction time to virtual objects can significantly improve the design of VR and AR applications and make the targets appearing be more user-friendly and responsive. So here comes the questions. What are the factors influencing our reactions in VR and AR? Imagine while walking in a VR environment, as marked in this guy at the bottom right area. We have multiple targets in our field of view. Our reaction is influenced by the visual stimuli, and it is also could be influenced by the sound we'll be hearing. The visual and auditory targets could interfere with each other to give a binding influence into our reaction. However, if we change our viewpoints, the targets in our field of view will be drastically changed by the eccentricity. So how is the eccentricity playing a role between the visual and auditory stimuli in our perception? Since our visual sensitivity decreases in the periphery, the reaction time will be tending to increase based on the eccentricity. Nevertheless, due to the increase in interaural time difference and the interaural intensity difference, our reaction to the audio targets becomes faster. It is exhibiting an opposite trend. So what occurs when these sensory modalities are simultaneously integrated? In order to answer this question, we conducted a perceptual user study to measure users' reaction time. In our pilot study, we measured the reaction time in visual-only condition, audio-only, and the integrated conditions. To test the visual-only condition, at the beginning, users will first fix their eye gaze at the center of the display. Then the visual stimuli will appear. Based on the rotation of the ease, we determine that the right position to be looking at as fast as we can. After that, the user will move their eye gaze to the correct visual targets. Testing in the audio-only condition, per each trial, 2 Gaussian blobs without the visual cue will pop off. Only one of them is accompanied by the sound. The user will determine the correct audio direction based on the sound source and look at the right one. In the integrated condition, for the perceived stimuli, audio and visual cue will both come up. and the user can process and analyze the information by 2 cues and shift their eye gaze as fast as they can. The reaction time is recorded as the onset of the user's saccade and targets. The protocol of our study ensuring the measurement of reaction time in all sensory modalities. Except for the eccentricity, we also include a unique factor for each sensory modality, which is the volume for the audio and contrast for the vision. Based on our pilot studies data collection, we discovered that the reaction time follows an inverse Gaussian distribution across all of the conditions. Besides, aligned with the prior discovery, reactions are faster to audio-only cues at larger eccentricity, contrary to the visual-only cues. For the integrated cues, the reaction is generally faster. This has encouraged us to develop a generalizable probability model to predict the distribution of reaction time, considering the various conditions. But how is the reaction procedure specified? To the Y-use drift diffusion model, we can specify the reaction time as a time duration as a procedure of accumulating the evidence to a specific level with a certain drifting speed. Intuitively, the evidence threshold alpha indicates the how much evidence we need to be gathered for us to perceive and react to a stimulus. The difficulty of processing sensory inputs is usually modeled to determine the drift rate, D. With the Brownian motion trajectory, we could predict users' reaction time, given the evidence threshold and drift rate, and predict the probability distribution of the reaction time. Therefore, we first extract the contrast, eccentricity, and volume factors of the targets, and then we fit a unified neural network to get the evidence threshold and drift rate. By leveraging the drift diffusion model, we could have our reaction time distribution under the various conditions. Thus, our model can predict reaction latencies in different contrast, volumes, and eccentricities. Inspired by the application in VR, we evaluated our model to differentiate with the pilot study and pursue a more generalizable situation. We designed the evaluation study with true and null target protocol. As shown, the user experienced a daily driving situation, and as marked over here, they perceive that a car is signaling to merge into our lane. In this situation, we define it as true target. For this target, user need to shift their eye gaze toward the car. Otherwise, as seen, if the light signal mentioning the car is not intending to merge in our lane, we define it as null target. The user's eye gaze remained unchanged in this situation. We preset the true null target under the different sensory modalities in driving, and also the gaming. This study intended an assessment of our model's prediction accuracy and generalization ability, and it compared the prediction with user behaviors in VR driving and gaming scenarios. The result demonstrates that our model's applicability in naturalistic scenes, maintaining consistent predictions with variations in scene types, were the novel target characteristic. By utilizing our model, we can provide a perceptual metric for the virtual experience. Imagine we are watching a VR concert over here. We can perceive the visual, auditory, and the integrated targets showing in the scene. If our viewpoint is showing as here, under a 330 millisecond interval, we may have a certain risk of missing the targets showing in the scene. To this phenomenon, our model is capable of predicting the probability of this undesired situation. After the change of the viewpoint, this probability is also changing. Therefore, the model is available to serve as a metric to recommend the optimal time interval for the target's perception in VR. And it is available to all extracted targets under the various conditions. In addition, the layout design in VR and AR is crucial in growing interactive applications. How do we place the visual and auditory interface? would it be good around this layout? Or maybe in the other positions? It is needed for an algorithmic guidance. By utilizing our model, we can know the perceptual area of which sensory modality is driven and dominant. Therefore, it can help us to set a clear boundary to separate the visual and auditory interface. By placing the visual and auditory interface into their dominant area, as illustrated, this model can be served as a guidance for the layout design. We propose a perceptual guided framework for reaction time prediction under the various sensory modalities and demonstrated two potential applications. This is a work toward perceptual guidance to the current VR/AR applications, and there are many fascinating future directions to explore. For instance, building a full spectrum perceptual metric may require other factors, such as object motion size, visual frequency, auditory frequency. The cross-conditioning model may shed light on multi-level and fine-gradient understanding of the human perception. In addition, a natural next step would be to extend our approach with multiple target interference. Thank you for attending my talk. I hope you enjoyed. And by the way, I'm looking for a summer intern in 2025 in human perception and VR. Please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Any questions from Discord? No. Oh, okay.
Could you please talk about your ground truth data, how you constructed it, and how much the data was used for the training and testing?
Oh, yeah. So for the evaluations study, we have 12 persons. And for the pilot study, we have 6 users. Because for the pilot study, we have multiple conditions. And for each user, we may have 12 hours to collecting the data. So we remain a small pool for the pilot study. But for the evaluation, we have a larger pool to evaluate our model is accurate and correct.
Any other questions? Okay, so I actually have 2 questions, and thanks for the great presentation. So when you have those stimuli, are at the same depth level, or are they at the different depth levels?
Are you talking about depths?
Yes.
So here's the thing. So our model essentially focusing on the eccentricity.
Okay.
So we didn't actually consider the depth part, but this is a great question. And as I mentioned in the future work, we may include maybe the auditory and volume and the frequencies and build a full spectrum metric. And depth is an interesting direction that will be included.
The second question is regarding the reaction time. So when you're considering the reaction time, is it the summation of, say, binocular vision, you have accommodation vergence time? Is it when you do the reactions, is you considering both accommodation time plus vergence time and the total binocular fusion time for that particular stimuli for the visual?
So I think here's a confusion over here. So for the reaction time, what we cared and what we measured is between the time duration between the target onset and the circuit onset. Okay. So how you move your eye, is it flying over here, there? We don't actually care, because the reaction is defined as how much information we need to be gathered to perceive and analyze the target. So that is our measurement of the reaction time.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks again. Thanks the presenter again. Okay. So our second presentation, it will be online via Zoom. The title of the paper is Depth Perception in Optical See-Through Augmented Reality, Investigating the Impact of Texture Density, Luminance Contrast, and Color Contrast. The authors are Chaochao Liu, Xing Ma, Yu Liu, Yongtian Wang, Weitao Song. And the presenter is Shining Ma through the Zoom.
everyone, this is Ma from Beijing Institute of Technology. The topic of my presentation is depth perception in optical see-through augmented reality, investigating the impact of texture density, luminance contrast, and color contrast. This study focuses on depth perception, but how to perform the depth perception in our visual system. There are 4 different ways: binocular disparity, convergence, focus adjustment, and motion disparity. These are all related to our physiological system. Among them, binocular disparity is a primary factor in depth perception, which has been widely used in most commercial 3D display devices, including the head-mounted display and the stereoscopic display, and so on. Besides these physiological factors for the depth perception, there are also some depth cues that can influence the depth perception. This depth cues refers to the information that can cause the visual system to form a sense of depth. So they can be classified into many categories, including the linear perspective, occlusion, relative size, motion perspective, and so on. So many factors in the environment can be considered as depth cues. Here we mainly focus on depth perception in augmented reality, and this topic has been extensively investigated over these years. Augmented reality includes the video see-through and the optical see-through, 2 types. Here we focus on optical see-through, where the observer can see the virtual scene and the real environment at the same time. Ideally, you cannot tell which is the virtual object, which is the real object in a completely immersive augmented reality system. So that requires a very high level of integration or registration between the virtual and the real scene. So one important factor is depth perception. So we want the depth perception between the virtual and the real are completely consistent. However, the depth perception in AR is very complicated. There are many factors can influence the depth perception, not only from the virtual object, but also from the real environment. So influential factors when rendering the virtual object, including size, luminance, color, rendering model, transparency, texture of the virtual object, as well as illumination settings when rendering the object. For the real environment, the ambient illumination, scene complexity, depth cues, sound can also be influential factors. This study mainly focused on the parameter called texture. Few studies specifically investigate the impact of surface texture on depth perception in AR, but the texture can provide some depth cues. So we want to know if we can improve the accuracy of depth perception in AR by optimizing the design of texture. This study aims to systematically investigate the influence of texture-related parameters on depth perception in AR, and we hope that the results can provide the guidance for the design of surface textures in AR, thereby reducing the registration errors between the virtual and the real. Here comes to the experiment design. We use the Microsoft HoloLens 2 as the optical see-through augmented reality device. The experiment was conducted in an indoor hallway, and the illumination was provided by 4 LED lamps fixed on the ceiling. And the illumination condition is quite uniform, with average luminance of 206 candela per square meters. The virtual object is a sphere, which has been positioned slightly above the ground with 10 centimeter distance. The depth matching method has been adopted to collect the bigger data in this experiment. An observer needs to match the perceived depth of the virtual object to the reference, which is a white strip on the floor. There are 5 strips fixed on the floor corresponding to different distance, from 4 meter to 12 meter with 2 meter interval. And we have 20 participants attending this experiment. Here comes to the experiment procedure. So before the formal experiment, we need to perform the internal calibration to adjust the interpupil distance of the HoloLens 2 to match the interpupil distance of the individual subject to ensure an accurate estimated depth. Then the depth matching experiment starts. The initial depth of the virtual object was randomly resetted. An object was required to move the virtual object in AR along the z-axis until it matches the depth of the reference. Then the system records the estimated depth of the virtual object. Then a new round starts. The first experiment focused on luminance contrast and texture density, and we selected the checkerboard texture to render the virtual object. There are 3 levels of texture density: low, medium, and high. It can be seen in the left figure. And the 3 levels of texture contrast, also low, medium, and high, which can be seen in the second row of the left figure. So different contrast was created by different RGB levels of the black patch. The white patch has a constant input signals, but the black patch has completely different signals from 25 to 229. The 3 levels of contrast can be quantified by Michelson contrast, which equal to 0.1, 0.5, and 0.9 corresponding to low, medium, and high contrast level. The object size has 3 levels equal to the diameter corresponds to 20, 30, and 40 centimeter. The registration error between the virtual and the real scene can be estimated by the sign error, which refers to the matching distance minus target distance. So if the higher sign error corresponds to a lower accuracy, and positive sign error means underestimation, and negative sign error means overestimation. Here we summarize the results. The average sign error of all the conditions is 50.7 centimeter, corresponding to 6% underestimation. And for the parameter of contrast, we find a significant main effect, with the p-value smaller than 0.01. And the contrast of the surface texture can reduce the depth error. But for the density, this impact is not significant. Object size, its impact is significant. And the increase in object size can lead to an increase in depth error. And the second experiment focuses on color contrast and backlight luminance. The color contrast, the text color has 3 different color pairs with different contrast levels, including red-green, red-blue, and green-blue. We can calculate their color differences in CIE-LAB space, and we can find the red-green and the red-blue color pair has a substantially larger color difference than the green-blue pair. That means they have a higher color contrast. And there are 3 levels of luminance, 17, 34, and 60 candelabra square meters. Note that for each ball, all the pixels on the ball has uniform luminance distribution. It has been carefully characterized before the experiment. And here are the results of the second experiment. For the texture color, its impact is significant. The p-value is smaller than 0.01. The the red-green, red-blue color pairs have a significantly smaller depth error than the green-blue color pair. That means higher color contrast of texture improve depth perception accuracy. But we don't find a significant impact of luminance. So that means the variation in backlight luminance does not significantly alter the depth error in this experiment. The third experiment focuses on the interaction between the luminance and color contrast, and we select the red-green color pair as an example, and we created 6 levels of luminance contrast for this color pair. And we performed a statistical analysis. However, we don't find a significant impact of luminance contrast on depth error. But we do see the depth judgment accuracy is positively related to the luminance contrast, although this trend is not significant. It's probably due to the contrast for the red-green color pairs already very high. Here we come to the conclusion. The perceived depths in AR consistently show underestimation. Enhancing texture contrast significantly improves depth accuracy in AR, especially for objects positioned further away. Similar effects are observed with both luminance contrast and color contrast in surface texture. And there might be a saturation effect, wherein no additional depth cues are provided beyond a certain threshold of the texture contrast. So all the conclusions can provide guidance for the texture design for the augmented reality in the real applications.
Okay, thanks the presenter. I think the presenter is available via Zoom to give the answers of any questions. Can you make sure that?
Yes, I'm here. Any questions?
Oh, okay, great. So Xining can hear us. So any questions from the audience?
Hi, how are you? This is Chisun from NYU. I have a question. So while you are trying to do the error matching task, there are factors such as Weber law, power law, that's the actual ground truth distance. When it's higher, the estimation error is supposed to be higher. While measuring the effect, have you scaled the error based on the power law or anything like that?
You mean the Pavel law, which is independent parameter? You mean the distance?
Basically, your error in estimation should be naturally higher when the ground truth is farther, right? So.
Yes,
yeah.
Of course. As you can see from the video, from the presentation, the further away the depth error increases. But for my results, I didn't test the Pavel law, but I do see the trend you just mentioned, and it's not that. I think if it's fitted by a Pavel function, the parameters will not the exponential factor will not deviate from 1.0 too much, because from my point of view, from my visual, from the data from my experiment, it's more or less close to linear.
Thank you.
But I will test what you have mentioned. It's interesting.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, there's one more question from the back.
Hi, Sabarish Babu from Clemson University. I have a question regarding your measurement method. You used a relative distance perception method as compared to absolute. Can you comment on why that was used as compared to, say, a closed, an open loop absolute method of distance estimation?
Thanks for your question. Yes, indeed, it's a relative measurement. It's not a measurement of absolute distance. I choose this method because it's more accurate from my point of view. Like if you use the oral report or the blind walking, blind walking, then the results will have a trend of underestimation. And based on the previous literature, it has been found that the measurement of the depth matching is more has like it's more accurate with a smaller error. So that's the reason why I choose this method. But I'm also looking for like if there's another measurement of absolute distance but with higher accuracy. If you have an idea, I'm really interested in this topic.
Yeah, although you might find perhaps that participants' response to the actual target when you measure using a relative distance measure, such as depth matching, is very close to the vertical, but the problem is that it doesn't actually measure distance estimation.
Yeah.
It's measuring just basically matching of the target with your reference target, and in the process, because it's closed loop, participants may use, for instance, the size of the ceiling tiles and other information that's available in the environment in order to estimate distance rather than the target itself. So I think the absolute distance estimation method is potentially the best way to get at distance estimation, and the higher variance essentially adds more power to your experiment. As someone who has done distance estimation for 20 years, that's what I recommend. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's thank again the presenter. Thanks, Sharing, for joining virtually. Okay, let's move to the next presentation. The next title of the next presentation is Subtle Cueing for Improving Depth Perception in Virtual Reality. The authors are Ammaar Zaman, Ernst Kruijff, Eduardo Veas, Aleksandra Krajnc, Neven El-Sayed. And the presenter of this talk is Ammaar Zaman from TU Graz. Thank you. We'll swap this place. Can you bring it up again? I can't see anything on it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ammaar Zaman, and I'll be presenting for the paper titled Subtle Cueing for Improving Depth Perception in Virtual Reality. Co-authors are Ernst Kruijff, Eduardo Veas, Aleksandra Krajnc, and Neven El-Sayed. So basically, a short title would be, I would be investigating augmented cues for enhanced depth perception in virtual environment. In order to express our motivation for this research, I would like to walk you through one of an example scenario. So the first step in interacting with any environment, whether virtual or real, is to analyze scene effectively. In virtual reality, scene analysis become crucial, especially when we need to extract critical information such as texture details, component specifics, or any context-sensitive data. So this image represents an industrial setup where there are multiple elements to inspect, potentially involving texture, component details, and operational status. Imagine that we are tasked with understanding specific features like surface damage, material properties, or other crucial contextual information. So after analyzing the general scene, the next step is to identify a specific feature of interest. One such critical feature in many industrial environments is the condition of the component, which often involves texture information. So in this example, we are highlighting rust, which is a pretty common specific feature of interest in industrial environments. So when we use traditional augmentation methods such as text overlays or color coding, we risk obscuring the texture detail, making it harder to properly analyze critical areas. This introduces a significant challenge. How can we communicate important data while maintaining the ability to fully see and understand the visual context of the scene? So we need an approach that provides users with necessary information without overwhelming the visual experience or hiding important details. As we continue our analysis of augmented features, this slide highlights two common approaches used in virtual and augmented reality environments: text overlays and color coding. So here you see the color of the liquid is used to provide information of the fluid, possibly indicating temperature or chemical composition. And in the text information, you add operational data directly onto the HMIs having to overlay on additional data. So while these augmentation methods are effective in many cases, they also introduce visual clutter. Imagine trying to assess the condition of the fluid or the integrity of the pipeline when text overlays obscure important parts of the scene, or when color coding does not harmonize well with the natural colors of the machine. So these issues lead us to an important question: how do we improve the user's understanding of critical data while minimizing distractions or obscured views? This is where the subtle cues become crucial. Now we come to the challenge of dealing with dynamic elements in virtual scene. So in many VR environments, objects are not static, they are moving, and sometimes not one object is moving, multiple objects are moving. So if we decide to add text annotations or color coding, for example, in text information, you will be updating information per every frame, or even color, which has to be color coded for every frame, and then a person has to interpret both the information and reference to the scene. So that becomes overwhelming. To solve this, we propose the use of subtle cues, which are designed to convey information in a way it doesn't overburden. Now, in the VR scene, we saw different sources of information that help us in understanding the environment effectively. So this could range from textures to dynamic indicators or even subtle features like lighting. For example, we've seen so much, the information is embedded throughout the scene in a variety of forms. For the sake of the study, we needed to isolate one specific type of information to investigate how it could be effectively conveyed without overwhelming the user or cluttering the environment. Therefore, we chose depth as a source of information. Why did we choose depth perception as the focus of our study? Because it's intuitive in nature, where all of us inherently use in our daily interaction. And then it's unobtrusive integration, which means that it blends seamlessly into the scene. And the third point is that it's familiar and direct, so you don't have to learn to understand depth in an environment. Coming on to the background section. So depth perception is essentially essential for interacting VR environments, as it helps users understand the spatial relationships. However, VR tends to challenge natural depth cues, often causing users to underestimate distances compared to the real-world experience. To overcome the challenge of depth perception in VR, we use augmented cues. Explicit cues like text, labels, and color gradients improve accuracy but can disrupt immersion. In contrast, subtle cues such as blur maintain immersion while enhancing depth perception naturally without overwhelming the user. So what's our research focus and how we can enhance the depth perception in VR without overwhelming the visual context? This led us to two core research questions. First, we asked how effective augmented cues are improving depth perception, especially in dynamic VR environments where movement and scene complexity can affect user judgment. Second, we wanted to compare explicit and subtle cues to understand their effects on user performance and immersion. So this comparison helps us determine which type of augmentation provides the best balance between enhancing information and maintaining an immersive experience. So this leads to our study design. So we chose this VR study environment to minimize external influences, focus solely on depth cues. The control environment reduced factors like lighting and shadows that might affect participant perception. The space theme design was deliberate to eliminate real-world visual elements like horizon lines and provide clear contrast for depth perception. The next, we introduced the target object. Within the control environment, this target object is central to our depth estimation task. By having a clearly defined target, we were able to measure how well participants could estimate its depth under various conditions. We defined our target object as an asteroid with an irregular shape. This was designed to ensure that depth estimation wasn't affected by the familiar shapes or objects. We wanted to prevent any preconceived object recognition and focus purely on depth perception. To simulate more complex environment, we added clutter in the form of smaller asteroids. The clutter represents dynamic changes in visual field, challenging participants to maintain their focus on the target object for depth estimation, even in more visually demanding scene. The catching frame represents the area where participants estimated depth and tagged the asteroid. This catching frame is a crucial element of our study design. It provides a consistent boundary for estimating the position of target as it moves. So the catching frame is subdivided into viewport zones to cover the observer's full field of view. This division allowed us to measure participant depth estimation across different sections of their visual field. So this was distance between 3 meters, 5 meters, and 7 meters, and our area of focus was in the action space. So this is how it looked in an actual game scenario. So in our study, we compared different types of augmented cues to assess their effect on depth perception. First was no cue was used as a baseline, and then you had text information where it was explicit when numerical distance values were displayed directly on the object. And then we had the color cue, which was also an explicit cue where we had a color gradient to indicate depth. As distance to target increased, the color transitioned from yellow as a far and then red as the near one. And then fourth, we had the blur cue, which we used as a subtle cue designed to be less intrusive. So we applied gradual texture blur that increased with distance. The intention here was to provide depth perception in a way where the participants naturally understand without adding explicit distractions. So the study procedure was basic and standard, where we had socio-demographic interview, then we had training sessions for all of the cues, then we had depth estimation sessions, and then the post-task interview. So just getting on to a little more detail on how the training participants were done. So there was a grid, flow grid to adjust the distance between 0 to 10 meters, and participants got used to each of the cue which we were trying to measure. So this was more like a familiarization task. Then we had the non-clutter session and the clutter session. So in the clutter session, we introduced multiple dynamic asteroids to create visually cluttered environment. So participants needed to focus on the target asteroid while maintaining occlusions from the moving objects. This tested cues effectiveness in visual complexities. So this was just extremely fast-forwarded to fit into the time. So the experimental design, we had the following variables, and just a brief independence for cue conditions, distance, and scene complexity. Then we had depth estimation as a dependent variable, focal attention, and subjective mental demand. And we had the following number of participants, 25, and the total trials analyzed in this whole study was 16,200 trials. Coming to the results and analysis section. So this was for our non-cluttered depth estimation session. So we used normalized error rates to compare participants' performance under different cue conditions. The graph on the left shows the average error rate z-scores for which conditions at 3 different distances, near, medium, and far. So the key observations were, in no-Q condition, error rates were significantly higher, particularly for far distance. Text and color cues generally perform better than no-Q, with a reduction in error rate across all distances. So blur Q showed competitive performance, especially in near distances, while error rates slightly increased on the far distances. In the clutter session, we found that it was a similar trend where no Q condition continued to result the highest error rates, and the text and color, the cues remain effective in clutter conditions too. In the blur, the performance of blur Q was more affected by clutter indicating the subtle nature, which was struggled by the added visual noise. Participants found it difficult to discern the level of blur when they were moving multiple moving scenes. Now we look at the focal attention and the mental demand across other conditions. So these were the findings. So in the text queue, both clutter and non-clutter environments, text queue received most attention, and blur and the queue required less visual attention compared to the text. But interestingly, the mental demand reported for blur were highest. This meant this might be due to the participants having to consciously try to detect more subtle visual change, increasing cognitive load, even though their gaze was not focused on the target for a long period of time. And then there was, in the complexity consistency, no significant difference was observed between focal attention trends between clutter and non-clutter conditions. So some, just the key takeaways from this study was that in virtual environments, traditional augmentation methods such as text overlays and color coding often lead to visual clutter and occlude critical details. For example, when inspecting an object for raw surface texture, overlays could interfere with perceiving of actual characteristics. Subtle cues can provide a better solution, allowing information to be conveyed while preserving visibility of the original context, which is especially useful for VR application involving complex scene analysis. Our study contrasted subtle and explicit depth cues. Explicit cues like text and color provided direct information. In contrast, subtle cues such as blur offered an effective way to enhance depth perception without distracting the participants. We chose depth perception as a use case because it exemplifies the form of dynamic information, and this approach could be broadly applicable to fields such as immersive analytics and maintenance application. Few of the limitations are narrow scope of subtle cues, controlled environment constraints, simplified object trajectories, where in the clutter conditions, the trajectories did not follow the natural collisions. And then lastly, the study focused on central vision. We need to analyze on the peripheral vision how these depth cues interact. Future work is that we plan to investigate other subtle cues, apply subtle cues in more complex VR environments like real environments, and then we check on the broader impact of VR metrics. So that was my presentation, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you. So we can take like 2 quick questions from the audience. Yeah, there's a question.
Bruce Thomas, University of South Australia. Thank you very much. Could you elaborate on what the future subtle cues would be? Because immediately I thought about, flight simulators from the 80s and 90s. They had all sorts of other cues that they did to try to trick you into thinking that something was far away.
Yeah, so here we are thinking of opacity, luminance, and texture distortion into much more detail. So these are potential candidates for subtle cues, if I understood your question correctly.
Yeah, one of the things that they did was atmospheric disruptions.
Atmospheric effects, yes. Yeah, that's a potential we would like to explore further. Thank you, that was a great question.
One more question.
In the text queuing, thank you for your presentation. Sababu from Clemson University. In the text queuing condition, where were the text planes actually located? Were they located at the same depth as the object?
Yes, so I could just direct you to that. So yeah, it was exactly like this. So what you see in the second figure, so it's exactly on the center of the object.
Okay, so this sort of text augmentation, I'm just wondering what makes it work. Could the text augmentation to the object provide additional object-relevant information beyond the target that could have added more distance information to the participants as compared to the object alone? Is that why we see the augmentation of text enhancing the depth perception related to the object?
If I understood your question correctly, yes, I would say the text information enhanced the text overlay on the object was enhancing the depth estimation accuracy in a better way.
That's kind of similar to sort of adding more objects to the same depth plane or to the target, or making the target much bigger or more salient, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Let's again thank the presenter. So if we have more questions, you can request the audience to talk with the presenter after the session. So let's move to the final talk. Thanks again. Let's thanks the presenter again. Please. So now we're moving to the final talk of the session, which will be online via Zoom. The title of the paper is "As If It Were My Own Hand, Inducing the Rubber Hand Illusion Through Virtual Reality for Motor Imagery Enhancement." The authors of the papers are Shiwei Chang, Yang Liu, Yufan Gao, Zhang Dong. And the presenter information is Yang Liu, is a master's student from Zhejiang University of Technology, China. Okay.
Hand, inducing the rubber hand illusion through virtual reality for motor imagery enhancement. Brain-computer interface, BCI, refers to the establishment of a pathway between external devices and the brain of a human or animal through signal acquisition devices to realize the exchange of information between the brain and the outside world. Motor imagery, MI, allows the user to imagine the movement of hands, feet, or tongue without actually performing the motor behavior to modulate the activation of specific areas in the brain. However, factors such as differences in training scenarios and training time, as well as individual differences among participants, greatly affect the recognition accuracy of the MIBCI system. In fact, about 15% to 30% of users perform so poorly in MIBCI that they are unable to use MIBCI properly. The rubber hand illusion is a well-known somatosensory illusion. In the experiment, the participant's real hand is hidden out of sight. Instead, a life-sized rubber hand is placed in front of the participant. The experimenter uses 2 brushes to stroke the real hand and the rubber hand synchronously. After a short period, most of participants start to feel the touch in the position of rubber hand and experience as if the rubber hand is the real hand. The rubber hand illusion inspired the question of whether it is possible to enhance the quality of EEG signals for motor imagery by using the rubber hand illusion to enhance participants' sense of ownership of a prosthetic hand used for visual guidance. We did experiments to verify the conjecture presented above. Our main work is to design relevant rubber hand illusion experiments using virtual reality to enhance the participant's sense of ownership of the virtual hand, and then use the virtual hand for visual guidance of motor imagery. Finally, we verified whether participants' motor imagery EEG signals would be enhanced. Our experimental environment is mainly shown in the figure, using HTC Vive headset to create the VR environment, wireless EEG cap to capture the EEG signals, and leap motion for hand movement tracking and synchronization. The above figure describes the 5 modalities we use to induce the rubber hand illusion, which are AM, HS, AM plus HS, PM, PM plus HS. AM means that the participant actively swings her hand, and the virtual hand in the VR environment will follow the participant's hand to swing in synchronization. And the PM modality means that the participant's hand is placed on a piece of paper, and the experimentalist drags the paper, which will lead to the participant's hand to move at the same time and the virtual. Hand in the VR environment will also follow the synchronized movement. Synchronized haptics is achieved by placing a cylinder in the same position in the VR environment and the real environment. When the participant's hand touches the cylinder, the virtual hand will also touch the cylinder in the VR environment. AM plus HS and PM plus HS are the additions of synchronized haptics based on AM and PM. A total of 60 participants were recruited for this study, 36 males and 24 females. The experiment was divided into 6 groups, with 6 male and 4 female participants in each group. The experiment was divided into 6 groups corresponding to the 5 methods of inducing RHI and a control group. The experimental procedure was similar in the 6 groups, each divided into 3 blocks containing 40 trials. Blocks 1 and 3 were identical in all groups, and only Block 2 differed. In Blocks 1 and 3, participants imagined movements based on the swinging of a virtual hand in the VR environment, and 40 trials were performed in this phase. At the end of this phase, participants filled out a subjective scale and took a 3-minute break. The trial consisted of 4 parts in total, which were 1, 0 to 3 seconds. A gray cross would be displayed on the screen, indicating that it was currently in the resting period and participants could relax. 2, 3 to 4 seconds. A white cross will be displayed on the screen, indicating that it is currently in the preparation period, reminding participants that the experiment is about to start. 3, 4 to 5 seconds. The experiment officially started. A blue arrow facing left or right was randomly displayed on the screen to remind participants to focus on the left or right hand next. 4, 5 to 10 seconds. The virtual rubber hand on the corresponding side would swing back and forth according to the cue of the arrow in 3 during this time period, and participants needed to observe the swinging of the virtual rubber hand to perform MI. In Block 2, participants were trained with the appropriate induced RHI according to their group. We used 3 metrics to measure performance gains in participants' MEEG signals before and after training. First, ERD and ERS were used as the most commonly used measures in MI. Briefly, ERD and ERS refer to the magnitude of change in the power of the relevant cortex of the brain relative to the resting state during motor imagery. Secondly, differentiation is essentially the degree of difference between different categories of EEG signals and is quantified using the Riemannian distance between the mean covariance matrices of the different categories of EEG signals. The greater the differentiation, the more distinguishable the EEG signals produced by the participants. At last, to understand the state of the participants during the experiment and the extent to which they hallucinated the RHI, we used a subjective questionnaire to assess the participants' sense of ownership. The average ERD and ERS amplitudes of the 6 groups of participants before and after training are shown in figure above. Participants in the 5 experimental groups showed different levels of ERD and ERS amplitudes in both left and right hands after training with the corresponding methods. It can be seen that, except for the control group, the ERD and ERS amplitudes of all 5 experimental groups after training were significantly different from those before training. Among them, AM, HS. AM plus HS have the most obvious enhancements. Except for the control group, the AM, HS, AM plus HS, PM, and PM plus HS groups showed a significant increase in the degree of differentiation of MI-EEG signals after training. Among them, the AM plus HS group showed the most significant enhancement of 38.05% in differentiation after training. We labeled before training, in training, and after training as phases 1, 2, and 3, respectively. In phase 2, participants in all 5 experimental groups experienced ownership, with participants in the AM plus HS group reporting the highest ownership scores. In phase 3, AM, HS, AM plus HS, and PM plus HS still experienced some ownership, while the PM group did not. The results showed a significant difference between phase 1, 2, and 3 in all groups except the control and PM groups. At the same time, there was no significant difference between phase 1 and phase 3 in the PM group. We constructed a real-time VRBCI training system for enhancing participants' MI-EEG signal quality and EEG signal acquisition recordings in VR, which applies the training methods proposed in this paper to help participants better control VRBCI. As shown in figure above, The system consists of two parts, the MI training subsystem in VR and the EEG signal processing subsystem. The MI training subsystem in VR mainly consists of MI scenarios, induced RHI training scenarios, and controlling the robot to eat the diamond minigame. The training part used the 5 experimental paradigms for inducing RHI in VR designed in this study, using which the system can assess the real-time classification accuracy of MI in participants after inducing RHI in different ways. During the test, when a participant performs a left-handed or right-handed MI, the system records a participant's EEG signals in real time and submits them to a classifier for classification, which results in left or right. The robot moves to the left or right according to the classification result, and if the classification is correct, the robot can eat the diamond. The figure above illustrates the online categorization accuracies of the 6 groups of participants before and after training. In the proposed hybrid-induced RHI method, the classification accuracy of the PM plus HS group increased from 87.8% to 91.41% after training. The AM plus HS group showed the most significant improvement of 6.89% in classification accuracy from 87.27% to 93.8% after training. In this work, we induced RHI in VR to enhance participants' sense of ownership of the virtual hand, which could improve the quality of participants' MI EEG signals in VR. Overall, we have utilized the features of VR to design a low-cost and efficient method for MI EEG signal quality enhancement, which can not only bring higher quality datasets for future studies in the field of MI, but can also provide value for research and rehabilitation.
Oh, let's thank the presenter. So I think the presenter is available via online Zoom. Any questions from the audience, please? Oh, okay. Bring the presenter. Yang, can you hear us? Can you unmute? I think the next, yeah.
Is Michael Dustin the presenter?
Yeah, he's muted on his end, it looks like.
Yeah, he's muted on.
Can you not?
No, that's me.
That's Mikkel, the last one, I think. Yes, you won. Young Liu. Sorry for that, some technical difficulties. So. Okay.
Not the presenter, sorry.
So, unfortunately, we're not having the presenter available for the question answer, but I would encourage you, if you have any questions, write the questions on the Discord channel, and I'll encourage the presenters to check the Discord channel if any conversation can lead there. That's all from Perception 3 session. We have 4 fantastic presentations, and thanks for joining, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you. And thanks again, the presenter.